Next slide, please. So you're all familiarized with our assets, which consist of which can be divided into two groups: core vocabularies and application profiles. But next slide, please. But in view of focusing on the semantic aspect, the idea was also from our side to create a style guide on providing guidelines to how those semantic aspects can be created and reused following practices, and also this was the objective of the style guide. It was presented into into GitHub, but also during a previous webinar. So the objective of the webinar is having consolidated your comments and as well to present and the finalized version of this style guide and discuss with you for next step. Here in the slide, you can also see the link for the finalized version of the style guide. Please, some from the team put also in the chat so that our audience can take a glance if they want. And I pass the floor to Bert to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for the welcome, Pavlina. So for me as well, a welcome. And together with the team, we have addressed your issues of the style guide. And as you know, the style guide has been is a long journey, already starting from the beginning, actually, of the SEMIC action, and has been some aspects being discussed and being formulated and in the whole community. And today we are presenting a consolidated text document that actually tackles and describes all these experiences and knowledge that that we have gathered as a community bit together into one document, and that you can use to build up further new specifications, not only as a roadmap, as a guidance for SEMIC specifications, but as well for the whole community. So this has happened. So what, of course, this is, as I already mentioned, our goal is that the quality and the coherency of the SEMIC assets, as Pavlina mentioned, the vocabularies, the core vocabularies, and the application profiles are better improved. And what are the rules, or the step back on saying what are the guidance that we follow? That is what is written out here in the style guides. And as it stands today, the style guide gives us a direction, a vision, how to do it, and maybe some activities that we have to make more fine-grained in rules or expressions of those rules for what we actually do at SEMIC. So this work is indeed not only for us, SEMIC, specifically, the specific action of SEMIC, but useful, we feel it is useful for the whole community within member states, but of course with the activity today, what's around data spaces, whereas a lot of needs are expressed for making data specifications, making that clear what semantics are behind the data, and so on. And so this style guide can help editors to create coherent and qualityful data specifications. Before doing that, we would like to have a bit of a look back since our previous introduction of this activity and the start of writing down the rules and so on that we shared in the first webinar. So we would like to do a little bit of interaction, just to know what is kind of the audience that is before us around the table, and so that we have an idea maybe sometimes to how to explain things and how we can go deeper into it for the next of the webinar. So we have a Slido prepared. The colleagues will put the link as well in the chat, or you can use the QR code. And it is just for us opinion. So we already know that some of you have read the style guide because they posted comments into GitHub, and thank you very well for that. But we don't know, of course, of all the participants around the table, what is the, let's say, the activity reading of it. So that's the first question. Have you read the style guide? And consequently, of course, if you have read or have been involved in some way, did you share it with your colleagues? So to read, to discuss among yourself, saying, okay, what is good, what we can take, what can we improve, what comment we should give to this set of rules. And a third one, and that's of course even a step further, if you are managing data specifications, did you use the style guide already, even in this preliminary version that was shared in the past months, to do a kind of an assessment on your own data specifications to see if the rules matched with your experience, with the current practice in your community? So we would like to do that. Jitse and William will take your comments for that. So I don't know how many there are, but Jitse and William can follow up a bit if we have sufficient response, and then we'll paste them into the slides. So we can share the results with you. Yeah, so this is a bit of a short pause to give everyone the ability to give their feedback on this and just to know what is the current audience around the table.
Okay, we will just give 30 seconds more for the first question, then we'll move on to the second one, because I saw that we can't do multiple questions at once. I need to reactivate them. So in 30 seconds, moving on to the second one.
Okay. So you see, all the technical thing is, of course, always like this. We want to do many things at the same time and very efficient. So thank you for your patience and your cooperation.
The second question should be available now. Okay, I see a lot of responses, so let's wait 10 more seconds and then we'll move to the third question. Next question is live.
Yeah. And if you're ready, Jitse, then you can take over and show the results. Okay, so we see that a lot of people have read it. Okay, so 3/4. In sharing, we see half of them. Well, probably more, because it's if everybody who answered not have read is as well said no here, then there's probably a high sharing rate of it. So if I see that, okay. And then there are already some people, okay, 30% or even more have done some actual assessment, but the majority wants to go ahead with this as a next step. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so that is, if that's working, I don't know. Did I? Now it's still on my slide. Now I have to see if you see back the. Okay, okay, I have to see to reshare my the file. Yeah. So.
I would like to kindly ask you to mute yourself, Peter, if you can mute yourself, please.
Okay, and then okay, and the slides come back.
Yeah, we can see the slides now.
Yeah, and now I'll go. Okay, so you see this empty slide. Okay, good. Now thanks for the feedback. So we have want to still to share for those who are not participating maybe in the first webinar, or want to give a bit of what is the context to provide you anyhow a bit of the self-contained, in short, what we expressed. As you know, the goal of a data specification is to be a mitigation and contracts, and to bring perspectives together, not only from data developers, but as well from business and domain experts, to make that gap closer, and even to the gap to the machines. So this thing of this triangle, we want to bring closer through the data specifications and make it as a bridge. And for that, of course, editors need to build good data specifications. And that is where the style guide is for. So mostly for those editors, of course, with an eye, and if you're a user of the data specification and so on, you should be at least have some basic understanding of what is presented on it, and how it's being built. So the goal is, of course, that this becomes coherent, so that we don't have different ways of expressing the same vocabularies or application profiles, that this is kind of give a coherent feeling across all the stakeholders of the users in this area. And that editors are facilitated to do that, so that they know in which direction to work, so that this coherency, even if they work in a distributed manner, is achieved. Within that, and is on the style guide, we have to identify that there are certain things into it, and we identified two elements, what we called asset types, the kind of things, the documents, the specifications that we are building and sharing. And in the context of CEMIC, these are the core vocabularies and application profiles. So those are two different objectives, although they share a lot in common. Namely, they are a collection of terms with some structure and rules how to combine or use them, and with a certain reuse expectation. But this is slightly different for core vocabulary, where the reuse expectation is very, very high, where an application profile is the reuse expectation set within the application context. And it's more specified, and as a consequence, you get more rules or structural information that is being imposed upon the terms. This, of course, has to be translated, and then we come towards our machines and developers in all ways of to try to communicate, to build bridges. Whereas the HTML is for the human side, business and developers to read. There are a lot of ways that we can express it in different formulations to make the bridging towards machines or to users or developers more. And as you see, here's a list of ways of representations that play a role into it. So these we call artifacts. And out of these artifacts, what we see there, that is a kind of a format. And this format is created and maintained in a way with a particular purpose in mind and addressing a particular concern. And that is how we look at the artifacts. So we try to combine on that and to see how that is. So, and on these artifacts and these specifications, if we bring that together and we look from the perspective of the editor, you want to facilitate the editor in a way that the editor does not have to type in the same information in different variations and formats, and to automate and support him in his duty. And for that, we introduced in the style guide the notion of a conceptual model, which captures the semantics, the way how reuse is being built and applied into it. So the base elements of this data specification. And then we connect this with a few key artifacts that play a big role in our semantic data specifications. And those are, on one hand, an HTML document, the human readable. So we want to make that very clear and to make a good document that everyone can read and process, associated with what's called a formal ontology. So the structuring the terms, what are present in the conceptual model, and a way to express the constraints that are possibly needed, whereas this list for constraints is probably in the context of core vocabularies as asset type very limited or very open, very permissive. This is for application profiles a much more important thing where you have more rules and constraints to be expressed, and that is what we call put in the context of a data shape. And to facilitate the editor, of course, we aim with our style guide that the editor works through the conceptual model towards the others, so that everything becomes a coherent story. And that's what we call the single source of truth for the editor. So that is the idea. And in the context of SEMEC, we applied already for more than 10 years the idea of UML as kind of a conceptual model behind it, as a graphical language, and this is how it is being expressed through UML as a conceptual model, converting and translating, connecting it with the formal ontology, the data shapes, and the specification document. But to mention many of the rules, if you look to the conceptual model rules, those apply to any conceptual model language. So there are only a few that are really specific UML. Most of them are generic. What we did, and this is something I think is very valuable of the style guide, that we expressed into a high extent what is the notion of reuse motivation and how you introduce new terms and add those terms in your data specifications. And we identified 3 patterns. One pattern is we reuse a term from another vocabulary or a specification as is. Another one is we're going to reuse it as much as possible, but there's a slight terminological change in order to fit better the use in this context. So we identified that this is a often common practice. And then we identified the other case, of course, as the reuse as is, there's the counterpart, that there are substantial semantical adaptations, or it's a new term in that's the most extreme case in that. And in that case, we have as well some advice. And so based on those three categorizations, the choices are presented in the rules, how you express that and how you deal that in the data specifications. No. So what it has read in and led into it, if you look to the feedback and in the rules, we had originally organized, of course, our rules according to some structure. Eugenia will explain the whole style guide in more detail, but we have some high-level structure. And based on your feedback, you already see that I identified the need for additional rules at the general and the conceptual level to make that more added and valuable and so on, so that we address your comments. Of course, in these rules are other changes and so on and impact, but that will be explained by Eugenia. What you have to close my introduction to the style guide, our objective, and this is a very challenging objective, of course, is that we, on one hand, want to be sufficiently precise and give good guidance. But in order to do that, it's a challenging job. So what we took into account is we want to be concise. We want to have this balance between precision, guidance, and variation, because we do not want to make the guidelines just or the style guide just applicable to the SEMIC specific context, but to be having a little bit more broader perspective. And we want to introduce through the style guide a set of considerations, aspects that you have to take into account when you're building data specifications. So this is that is the goal of the rules and how it has been set up, the document, that you keep that in mind, that we have this challenging job of finding the right balance. Okay, is there anything that we quickly have to address in the questions, Jitse? I didn't follow it yet.
So in the questions and the comment section, it's mostly about the UML approach, but we will get back to that. So maybe let's just start with the tour.
Okay, good. Eugenia, you can share your slides. That's easier. So
well, yeah, probably instead of sharing the slides, I should be sharing the sharing the screen to do a tour. Good morning, everyone. I will be your guide today through the style guide. So if you see my screen, can you?
yes, you see it.
So what I aim to present now is basically this the style guide page. So you are familiar with the structure, with its structure, and then I will briefly walk through the GitHub repository where we host the source code of the style guide. So to start from the beginning, what I should mention is that we have kind of an introductory part to it. And it has 3 important pages. So okay, we have an introduction section where we present the audience and the scope, what's in scope or what's out of the scope. We wanted to have that cleared out from the very beginning to help also ourselves to know what we focus on and what we leave out for later. And then we felt the need, because there is a lot of there are many terms that are being used, and often with multiple meanings. And what we felt the need for is to yet again create terminological clarifications and explain what it is that we mean by a semantic data specification, or by an artifact, or by an asset, and so on. So we provided this section on terminological verifications. And one thing that I want us all to embark on, or like I want us all to embark on the idea that the semantic data specifications are comprised of artifacts, and each artifact addresses a specific concern, either on the user side, or on the business side, or on the developer side, or on the machine side. So the idea is that we have data specifications which are composed of or realized as in different artifacts. So that's the main idea here. Then we explain a little bit of the architectural setup, and we make a distinction here between the semantic interoperability, between technical interoperability, and how it's manifested in different artifacts. For example, this is addressed quite in detail in the last section here on technical artifacts and concerns, as opposed to the semantic or semantic concerns that we want to address primarily in SEMIC. So I will not go into details. I'm just highlighting you this aspects here. Then one term in particular, which is used very often, but again, very loose. It was used very loose. So we felt the need to actually provide it a section on its own, and to explain what reuse means, and how it actually materializes, or how it manifests itself in the SEMIC context. So we defined we describe different types of reuse here in this section. And then after clarifying all these things, the terms and the architectural setup, and then we grouped all the conventions or guidelines in 6 parts. 6? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right. So some of them are quite general, like more basic principles. But then some other ones are quite specific, either related to the, let's say, the semantic aspects of the semantic assets of the data specifications, or more on the conceptual level. I don't know if I should go in depth. I mean, here maybe one thing to mention, that in these sections, I will just share a rule template. We try to organize the rules in this form, where we give it a very short title, an ID. And this ID, we wanted to ensure that we will not change. I mean, we want to provide like persistent IDs. So once we use an ID for a rule, we will always keep that one. So it's possible later to refer to them easily in the tool in the tool chains, for example, or in the implementations, someone can use this references. Then we want to have a clear and short statement of the guideline or of the rule, and then we provide a description. So we elaborate that statement, we expand it, and we try to give as often as possible examples that show how this rule applies in practice. And in the description, we answer questions, or we try to answer questions about the rationale. Why is it there? What are the benefits of applying it? What are the constraints, limitations, and so on? Okay, so if you look at any of the sections about, for example, general conventions, then you will always find this structure for the rules with the title, identifier, statement, and some description. We also provide, we try to provide references to other standards or other similar style guides or other texts that talk about the similar issues or similar rules or recommendations. And we've assembled a list of references. You can find them in the references page, but I'm sure that this is not an exhaustive list of references. So actually, if you have more references, or if you know references, or if you know text that we missed and we didn't include it, I think it would be nice to receive from you links to similar material, so we can make this style guide later more robust and more complete in this matter. So I don't know if I should go, because I have difficulties choosing now one rule in particular and then explaining it, or maybe I should move on to other aspects of the style guide. So there is little back matter where we provide this rule template, list of references, and an index of rules. You can see them. It's like just an inventory of rules to make it easy to navigate and access them. And we received requests for providing the style guide as a whole document, like as one big document, complete document. So we also organize it as a whole. Here's one page where you find the whole content of the style guide in one go. I mean, you can find in page here, but you can also use the search when you need to search for something. I don't know. On shackle, you can see where shackle is mentioned and how, or on reuse, or if you're interested for specific thing, you can use the search functionality here. Okay. At the moment, the version of the style guide is okay. We said it's a public review, but it will be announced at the end of this webinar. We will release the version 1 of the style guide at the end of the month. Now, if you find mistakes, problems, editorial mistakes, you can always edit the page, and this will translate into a pull request for us, so we can we use the GitHub ecosystem to receive direct edits if it's a small thing, or if it's something that can be fixed quickly. However, if it's something at a different level, if it's more of like an issue or a question, or then we highly recommend opening GitHub issues, opening issues in the GitHub repository. And I see yesterday we received already by yesterday we already received quite some issues, and that's great. We are happy to see this kind of inflow of feedback. if you access the style guide repository directly, you will find a link to the HTML version. So they are interconnected. And what should I mention here? Probably is that, I mean, you're very welcome to contribute. Here's a reference to self-assessment that we will show in a moment, not yet. Probably it's worth mentioning that we keep a changelog, or we try to keep a changelog as accurate as possible. But yeah, I mean, here you can see all the changes that we've done or things that we've addressed between the first webinar and the second one. I mean, this one. Yeah, that's it that I wanted to share with you. That's like the style guide in a nutshell. So just to recap, there is the HTML version of it, and you can also access the GitHub repository. You can see some other metadata and the source code of the style guide here. Maybe then I should go now to that we've done the tour. I should go to present briefly the changes that we've implemented. And I will present from here, from the current slide. So, as I said, we received quite some very good feedback. We received this feedback through different channels. So we held, well, first of all, we held the previous webinar, and there was a mural dashboard where we could, where people provided us many notes. Then we also held a series of bilateral meetings with several, like with chosen players or relevant players, actors that also provided us more. Like we had discussions, and we kind of echoed the understanding of those people of the first version of the draft version of the style guide. We implemented that as well. Some GitHub issues have been opened. We addressed many of them, and there are some ad hoc external reports that we took on board. The type of comments we received, well, they were some general comments, sometimes some good requests for clarifications on the architecture, and we managed to strengthen also the explanation of what reuse is in the light of this feedback. And there were like some other specific feedbacks. And when we received it, we tried to figure out whether it's in scope of the current version of the style guide, or it's out of scope, or it's out of scope, but we thought about it and we kind of think of including it in the future, or it's possible to be done in the future. So what was in scope? We added the metadata and the governance description around the style guide document. Well, it's document / GitHub repository, and it's in the contribution section. It's described. Then we reviewed, of course, the architecture, the rules themselves, the terminology, and reuse section. I already mentioned that. What was out of scope in this iteration is to address the handbook for using the core vocabularies. But it's planned to be addressed later. Also, what we do not plan to address now is provide any tutorials on how to use or adopt the style guide, or how to validate or go into more technical layer of interoperability, such as how XML editing is supported, or how to create the mappings between different artifacts. we left this out of scope for the moment, but we are aware that we need to address it. So we don't know yet how exactly it will be addressed. There are some ideas circulating. So one straightforward approach would be to expand the current style guide, so write it in the similar style, just add more sections. There were other suggestions to write blog-like articles where we can take an issue and kind of go more into details to kind of explain different aspects of that issue. And this is not the approach of the style guide, and that's why this idea of blog-like articles came to be. And then the topics that we consider, governance and evolution of the specification is one hot topic that we should definitely address, and consider alternatives to the UML, because when we were bringing UML into the picture, we received a whole palette of reactions to it, and we are aware of the shortcomings and the strengths of this approach, and I hope we explain it well in the first part of the style guide when we express when we provide terminological and architectural clarifications. Then we can expand, we can talk more about technical interoperability, do's and don'ts, reference to authoritative standards, such as, for example, controlled vocabularies or ISO-like standards. So we try to address shortly, but there's much more to discuss on these topics. And multilingualism was another thing that was requested to be explained specifically, but in my opinion, we kind of cover it in the lexicalization section, but of course we can expand on that. So major types of changes, I already mentioned the metadata and governance. We extended the clarifications on terminology, architecture, and reuse. And there were editorial fixes, quite a few of them, and I'm sure many more will follow. But that's like an ongoing process. So one thing that we wanted to stress was the need for a conceptual model that will act as a central source of truth, from which other artifacts are derived. So we explained this need in the architecture section, so we expanded on that. We also provide a very clear and minimal inventory of what is used from the UML, and we insist that UML as such cannot be used as a language for the conceptual model. It can be used only in combination with a very clearly defined set of interpretations for the UML elements. And we provide this very clearly defined set of interpretations in the conceptual model. Maybe I will show it. We provide this in the conceptual model conventions. So the role of all these rules here is to ensure that it's possible to implement a tool which follows a precisely defined UML conventions and can translate from UML XMI in particular into SHACL, OWL, HTML, and other representations. XML for that matter, but yeah, we didn't address that. So let's go back. So I will present from the current slide. Some minor things. So in my opinion, there's OWL and OWL 2. So we just clarified which one we want to use, or which one we want to refer to when we mention OWL. Then when it comes to reuse, there were nuances. There were quite some nuances when it came when it's about reuse as a further, like reusing a class, but like further refining it, because the initial or the external foreign class is too broad, and we need like a more specific variant of it. And there was quite some discussion, and I'm sure that this discussion is not over. On the opposite, I think it's worth spending 1 or 2 blog articles on explaining the approach to domain and range constructs. So we did our best to clarify it in the reuse section. Then there were changes. We improved the rules. So almost all of them have been rephrased to sound more clear and more like precise or less ambiguous. And some sections have been extended, and yeah, we clarified what lightweight ontology is, and we provided also support for the lightweight ontologies from other literature, explaining why these are like it's important that the ontology is lightweight. Yeah. Well,
maybe Eugenio,
yeah.
if I can interrupt for 1 second, there were a lot of questions already about why we're using UML as a single source of truth for everything, and not split stuff up between the shackle and UML for different things. So it might be good to just quickly tackle that.
With pleasure, no problem. So, why if I present from the current slide? So the job, like this is the final, in this picture, we see the final audience of the data specifications. On one side, we need that domain experts and business people can look at the data specification and understand it or be able to read it. At the same time, we need the developers to be able to look at this data specification and understand more the technical aspects or figure out how this could be implemented in technically. And of course, the machines should be able to look at the same data specification. Well, the machine don't look. These specifications can be implemented and the machines can operate on the same specification. Unfortunately, the language spoken by domain experts, the one spoken by the machines and the one by developers, they are different languages, and these are totally different concerns. Here comes the editor of these data specifications. Somehow, magically, and strongly, the editors have to create these data specifications in a way that it's presentable or accessible to all these to these 3 groups of players or stakeholders. Now, in this style guide, we discuss about separation of concerns, and it's here in the architectural specification. We talk about separation of concerns, and we explain that what is the concern for the domain experts, what is the concern, there's another concern for shared conceptualization, there's a need to agree on the definitions of the concepts, we want to achieve interoperability, so there's a need to provide a minimal set of constraints to support the instantiation. There is also a need to facilitate the reuse. So whatever is being published, it should be accessible to the community and clear. So different needs we find it that they're addressed in different artifacts or in different forms. When it comes for the machines to access it, OWL is the best. When it comes to validation and instantiating the data specification, shackle is the best to contain it. When it comes to dissemination and human reading it, HTML probably is a very good form. When it comes to discussing concepts with business or with domain experts, in my personal experience, I have never or rarely I've seen a discussion reaching a common understanding or a good understanding shared between all the participants in a group, unless you put some visual diagram or you discuss using some visual notation. So that is another concern, to create consensus and to kind of show how things interconnect, and we need a visual aspect to that. So these are one set of concerns. I mean, these are the concerns that these are the primary concerns that are of relevance in SEMIC, and the job of the editor is to do such that it can create artifacts. At the end of the day, we want to publish artifacts which address each concern in particular, because there is no one language or one representation which can address all of them. And therefore, we came to this idea, and it's not an invention, it's just we are documenting a very long and established practice. So the editor, and please be mindful, I want to insist here that we're not talking about, we don't want to talk about UML diagrams, although that is one particular concern that is addressed visually for visual representation. We want to treat, we need a language for conceptual models, and UML happened to be around, and it was fitting the purpose, or let's say it was a good tool to pick up. We are not insisting that this should be the only or the language for the conceptual model. However, the idea of a conceptual model which covers all the information needs that can later be materialized in different artifact types, that is very powerful, and that is very relevant, and that's very useful, especially when it comes to editors needing to synchronize what it's in the diagram, what's in the shackle shape, what's in the ontology, what's in the documentation. You know, we cannot have the editor should not be editing multiple times or multiple sources. There should be one place, and from that place the changes are propagated. So that's how this idea of single source of truth in the conceptual model came to be.
And just to add, and maybe then we quickly maybe open the floor, because I think this is a concern. I think here in the challenge, and this is, I saw in the chat that some people suggested the other way around, for generating from a textual representation a visual representation. We know that this exists, and probably I've used it as well. The challenge with that is that if you want to be coherent and to be cross, let's say, the nice visuals and graphs, and to have this updated over time, that is very challenging. Mostly of the time you start editing the diagram again and again to make something nice and presentable, because humans do not read just clickable graphs. You want to give a message with the diagram. That's the problem of the diagram. The diagram itself is a language that you try to use to communicate with some target audience, and therefore you edit and organize the diagram in a particular way. So that you saw already in the style guide, sometimes we have rules like you can do not follow this in the visual diagram because of readability. So we have some notes in the rules that, yeah, to make the diagrams readable, you might have a slightly different way of formulating. For instance, not expressing all super properties that are available, but omitting them just for the readability. So that's a challenge in its own right, this visual diagram. And if you look then from the editor's perspective, how we can make to it, then it's very, we try to find a place what is the best for the editor to work in this context. And then starting from the diagram, if you anyhow have to do such an effort, and because it's quite an extreme effort, if that can use to be as the language for the conceptual model, then we can do something with it. Then the things become for the editor easy. So this is a choice to use a visual language because of this challenge as the language for the conceptual model. And then if you take that consideration into account, then you have to say, what is the visual language around? And then UML class diagrams pop up as the natural language that things up it. So this is the history behind on that. And I see indeed many people struggle with it. So they want to have something visually. And if you generate it from a knowledge graph, you can do marvelous things of browsing and following it. This is something that you don't have with the UML diagram as such, because it's scoped to this single document. But if you want to create that, you can still create it and you can build upon that. But it's a different audience and target than for this specification. So I hope this is clarifying. Maybe we can open quick now the floor on it.
So we can, maybe I can just add one more thing, that, you know, we are aware that UML doesn't have a precise semantic. We are aware that the same thing can be expressed in many ways, multiple ways in UML, and we know that it's far from perfect. What we want to stress here is that we don't insist on UML. We want to suggest that there's a lot of value of using a conceptual model as the beginning for capturing all the aspects necessary in a data specification. So this is the main idea. It's not UML per se, it's conceptual model in whatever language it is expressed that covers all the information needs and addresses the concerns which have been identified, and they are listed in the here in the architectural clarification. And then we are very open, and in fact we encourage the idea of thinking what other conceptual model language or what other languages could be used, or what are the suitable languages that could be used as a conceptual model language. So UML seem to be UML class diagrams seem to be the most at hand, let's say, in terms of tool support, tooling, and what it can express. And yeah, so we invite, or we encourage discussion on this topic, basically, and ideas on this topic. Okay, that's it. So Bert, you're muted. What should we do next?
I think we opened the discussion, so Ingenio here. So let's have people now react on it.
Well, we had a break planned.
Okay.
Or, I mean, we can take a break, or we can launch into discussion.
Let's maybe quickly ask Eugenio in the chat if people want to break or start a discussion already.
All right.
So if you need a break, maybe do a +1 quickly, and if not, a -1, and then we can decide if we just continue the discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, people want to do the discussion, so
okay.
Okay, good.
Good. Let's discuss. Wonderful.
Okay, don't know who wants to, of the audience wants to raise its hands first, and then we give the floor, because we have been speaking quite a lot now.
Yeah.
I see Robert. Okay, Robert. Well, just...
Good morning, everyone. I found the model indeed very important, especially when it comes to discussion with the business. But usually how we start to create those data specifications is from something that exists. And therefore, I understand colleagues that would like to start from the representation side of the model that is currently at hand and used. And I'm actually in the process of creating the data specifications. And what I have are the JSON payloads. And now we are in the process of transposing those into JSON schemas as a data models. And yeah, the next thing will be most probably to create the UML to understand better how the conceptual model works and get sign off from business, because yeah, we all know that business will not actually understand the JSON schemas as good as UML. So I do agree that we need to have sort of a visualization of the module of the model, not only for the reviewers, but also for business people that could agree and confirm that the model that is presented suits the or fits the reality that the given business domain represents. So I think that what we could consider is to have a sort of a tools that could, or sort of a path that could help colleagues to come up with the UML diagram from the data particles that they have at hand. That's just brainstorming here, nothing really, I would say, solid. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, for your contribution. I saw Rita raising hands and then lowering it. So if Rita, if you want to join, then raise your hand again. But otherwise, I give the word to Thomas. Sorry. Yeah. Wait. Yeah, Thomas, go ahead.
Oh, hello. Good morning. Thanks. A couple of comments. This process of going from the UML conceptual diagram to all and shackle is actually what we do most of the time. And there's a good example now with the European Parliament Open Data Portal that is using this approach and documents the structure through UML diagrams. I was asking on instances and example diagrams, which are a very good way to convey the semantic of the model to business stakeholder and also developers. I don't think the style guide mentions instances or example diagrams. Was this omitted on purpose?
Yes, it was omitted on purpose in the sense that we knew that this is an additional, so examples and so on are clarifications that are very useful. But if we started or worked upon that in the first place, it would lead us very far. So we wanted to have this as a first ground rule, these things, and we saw that more as a next step. Because, and I saw, I think even in one of your comments of how to represent an individual instance and so on, there are some guidelines from the perspective of semantic web as well on it, with persistent identifiers that apply to it and so on. So this is a story on its own, together with in the other historically another action of CEMIC, but now under the umbrella of CEMIC, the access to base registries, where those challenges actually are being discussed as well, or has been discussed in the past. So on instances, etc., etc. So, but it's future work. So we think this is additional contribution.
Maybe I can throw a comment here as well, quickly. So for drawing instances, we have been, I mean, I speak from my personal experience. We have been using object diagrams where you can instantiate the classes. However, we did not come up yet with a very precise, clear, specific set of rules how to draw those things. And we didn't have yet any implementation for transforming this object diagrams into examples of instantiation examples. So, but yeah, it's future work.
If I may, I have another comment while I have the floor. The generation of documentation in practice, what we do now, we generate this documentation from the shackle and from the OL, not directly from the conceptual model, which does not break the single source of truth for the conceptual model. It's just generated a second step from shackle and from OL, with two different documents.
Yeah, indeed, and in principle you can do that, so it works. What we tried for the editor here as a point of view is saying to bring the things together in one place, and not to have, let's say, different ways to express potentially the same thing. So for instance, a domain, if you want to say something belongs to this as a domain, then you can express it in the shackle shape and you can express it in the formal ontology, and this has to be coherent. So that's just a remark of a challenge that with these two languages at hand, we have to make a decision and an agreement how to make that work. But it's probably workable if you make this agreement. So this is the point of affair then you have to make. Another question, Thomas? Or...
I have a kind of follow-up on St. Olsen there, on that with documents. A little bit what we trying to aim at in our tools in the power industry is to generate ADOC. So we don't really saying how we're going to be serialized. That gives also the possibility to add shackle or add other element in it, because you're kind of combining it, which basically the same way are you doing your style guide here on the web. So you actually have an ADOC documents underneath that is the source, and then you can then generate Word documents, you can HTML and anything. And I think that would be, very, very useful in the way of thinking. So in a way of having tooling that support it, I would consider that a conceptual model tool should be able to export ADOC in all those diagrams and stuff. And on another topic is we have been using or aiming at using that conceptual model to produce the artifacts like in OVAL, so that we can generate the SDK, so software development kit. And since everybody currently more or less is using object-oriented schemes, we kind of aim at using RDFS Plus as the core ontology language. But I'm definitely seeing that there can be a need to expand on that to cover the overall too. But I think that type of two-stage thinking there could also be very useful, because as we outlined, the audience of this is software developers, and as long as quite a lot of software is developed in object-oriented time frame, the idea of them being able to generate the SDK for Python, Java, C#, Azure, language, whatever you want to develop, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Can I throw a
Indeed.
comment here? In fact, you're touching on a point that we were pondering as well, but finally we had to just make a decision or create a recommendation. But in the rule SCR2, which talks about limited expressivity, or basically enforcing the idea of lightweight ontologies. Here we have a list of what kind of constructs and expressions we want people to limit themselves to when creating this lightweight ontologies. And if you look at this list of class and properties, any language, RDFS, OWL, OWL2, any language fits because they are very basic ones. Well, maybe except when you want to distinguish between data types and object properties, then OWL comes into the picture. But if you don't want to make that distinction, RDFS is sufficient to express
the data type property is part of the RDFS plus. So as I can see here, I think all of them is in ray capture there. But I still think that it has useful to be able to have a lightweight, which is, should be constrained by RDF plus, would be my suggestion here. Then it should also be possible to then generate an artifact that expand on it. So we can utilize, everything that is part of the ontology OLL2 language. But the fact that we can separate those makes a lot of sense to me.
That's precisely what we do in a project. We have like the core, we call it core, like limited lightweight ontology, which is limited only to these expressions here. And in addition, we bring the logical heavy cavalry with restrictions, class equivalences, subclass expressions in a separate artifact. So we call it like a core lightweight ontology artifact. And then we have like a reasoning artifact, or like a restrictions artifact, which extends the core with more axioms.
I like to have the reasoning artifacts because I like the shackle being the restriction.
And then shackle is different. Yeah.
So having the reasoning, so you putting a little more advanced, because it shouldn't necessarily contradict, or it shouldn't contradict, but it should emphasize relationships.
So to comment here, a little bit perspective on your layering approach. This is something that is present in our asset types, where you say vocabularies versus application profiles in the introduction into it. That is another way of layering, which leads to a slightly different use, or let's say content of the different generated artifacts that are going hand in hand with it. And that is something that, let's say, you have to probably take into in your account of your layering towards going to developers and to generating code, that you actually apply that layering at the level of the data specifications in a good way, so that this reuse is being visible and it being done correctly. That's the reason why we have these reuse guidelines as well, that we do this layering through the data specifications in the end to come to a situation that is very close and acceptable for the implementer, but that you can kind of on the semantical data layer level can go back to the more generic ones in stepwise way. So this is a bit of the idea that is underpinning as well the style guide, that in these rules would allow you to build specifications that can build upon other specifications, so that you go stepwise towards your implementation, and that this is done with honoring the semantics of the original point where it has been defined as origin. So this is the let's a bit of the, and that might not be so visible into it, but that's in the style guide, but that's the idea as well. And I think this fits exactly what you want to do, layering, and you have to do this layering, and you have to make that visible in some way.
And maybe if I can just throw one more comment, I will reiterate as many times as I can. In the European Interoperability Framework, it's a legal document explaining different layers of interoperability. they distinguish the legal, organizational, semantic, and technical. So one thing that we try to emphasize in the style guide, that we want to focus primarily on the semantic interoperability. We do not yet address the technical interoperability, but we need to, or we have to. But so here at the end of this, there's a section explaining the problems or the issues with technical interoperability. When we took some examples of JSON, XML, relational databases, just to clarify in that.
Okay.
Other questions?
No, I will follow. Then I'll give the word to Rita, because I was switching her with Thomas.
All right, thank you. Yes, I have one comment and one question, and my comment is about this general discussion about UML and OL and so on. I think that when you said that UML is because of the visualization and making this understandable, I understand that very well, because that's the problem we are tackling also. And I think that when you said that UML is more like the good approach, but we can do also different kind of approaches once, even when we make same results, or when we get same results. So I think that this is fine, and thank you for that. And I think that you should say that, because I think that when you say that UML is the single source of truth, it's very mandatory. So that if you can also make a statement that you can approach differently, but then you anyway must make the specifications in that format that they are interoperable with others. So I think that when you, if you add that statement, then it's very good. And in general, I like very much this document, because I think that it gives very good clarifications and instructions, and so that I think that is very good baseline from which we can start. So in that sense, I'm happy when this kind of change is done. And then that was my comment. And then the question was that you said that we should use URIs and not IRIs, because there is some problem. So I think that you might clarify also that, because I think that I understand why URIs, but if we are going to be future proof, then what about the IRIs? Thank you.
Okay, so just thank you for your comment. I just want to add one element on your feedback. The first feedback, Rita, is that if in preparation of this this webinar, I looked through the conceptual model conventions, the guidelines on there, and the rules. And then actually, if you look carefully into it, then you actually see that many of those rules actually are agnostic to UML, although the examples, of course, are all UML oriented. But many of, if you use another conceptual module language, you have to address that concern. That's what I want to say, except, of course, the visualization of UML specific things then.
Okay, thank you.
So that, and then on the URIs versus Iris, Eugenio, can you help?
Well, it was argued somewhere else, I think, in this 10 rules for persistent URIs. I think the problem with IRIs is that it introduces, it allows the beyond ASCII char set in the IRI. So imagine that we have a Chinese characters written there. I mean, I take an extreme example here where not everyone can type or not everyone can write that. But then you can argue that IRIs and URIs are not for humans to type. They are just identifiers, and that would be a counter argument to to the previous point. In general, but I think the more general idea here is that we propose English to be the lingua franca of the specifications. It's written somewhere here, I don't know, in the general conventions. And if we take English as the lingua franca that anyone could read and write whatever is in the specification, then ASCII is sufficient, and therefore URIs are sufficient. I mean, IRIs simply, they allow for other char sets, they allow for these apostrophes and other special characters, and that we think it might introduce problems, unnecessary problems, although
I think here this is a thing of, in principle, you can replace it. So there's no problem. The rules will not fail if you use RIs.
yeah,
The thing is the challenge that we come with is that reusers of the specification might get into trouble because of not lack of support and familiarity with these extended charters. And that's just the challenge. And if you're accepting that as a consequence of your specification, that people might have difficulties technically to reuse it because of that, and then you would have questions about that and so on, then it's fine. So there's nothing that it would prevent on it. We are a little bit in the rule here stricter and try to be more, let's say, get out of the problems as much as possible.
Okay. Yes, I think that so in principle we could mint ERIs, but so that they are actually technically URIs.
Exactly. You know, because you might have servers that don't support certain localizations, and then you run into strange, unexpected problems at the technical layer.
Yeah.
So it is a bit of that challenge of the balance on that. So it is it's always the same story when it comes to charted languages. I think one element I want to address on point here is that URIs, although in sense of people like to be that they are readable and understandable as well and match the semantic, that might be an objective of your data specification. Users and reusers should try to read them through the dereferencing, and that you get to the right semantics and the right meaning of it, and you not rely on the human interpretation you might have of the short name or something that you see. So, for instance, if you go to DC Terms, you have nicely creator or DC Terms creator as property. You should not rely in the reuse and in the potential and the semantics on the word creator, but on the definition that is associated with it. Just as a, well.
Maybe Bert, let's just still quickly give the floor to Agatha, and then we can move to the assessment part.
Yes, indeed, it's good.
I just wanted to put some kind of practical approach instead of very technical approach. I'm not a coder myself. I'm just the one who tries to bridge the business and governments and developers itself. So what I wanted to point out is that conceptual models are defined not so clearly as you would like to see them as for now. I mean, people are creating some kind of solution, they're trying to draw it out, and they are asking developers to code it, not reversely. That is the idea from the substantial point of view. And then there is a way of coding. Instead of trying to say that we need to figure it out how to code it, we are saying it is possible to code everything you need just to find a way of approach. You can see the solution there. So I think that the reservation of conceptual model for the purpose of very, very formal UML is not, let's say, the most desired approach. And I would like perhaps ask everyone to reconsider that concept, whether it is going to be accepted for the wider amount of users who's supposed to read the guidelines or the set of information that is provided. The second information is that I've pointed out within the chart is that the visual representation of information leads users to understand what we are expecting from the user or developer or anyone who would like to apply the style guide. If we are not offering something that is more or less in line with the market methodologies that are present, it is not going to be accepted by the wide range of coders, which are a little bit younger than we are, and they are not reading a huge amount of text presented so solidly. So perhaps some kind of more open way of presenting the information would be more suitable for the purpose of the real application of that guidelines, instead of just having them on the web page. That is perhaps a little bit critical. Still, I'm working with students and young developers, and they are not reading at all if something is not presenting on a picture. So perhaps that is the way to try reconsider just the means of delivering the information, instead of trying just to say that it is proper or not. The way is a little bit too solid to address the very large amount of regular front-end developers, I mean that front line, which are really coding that. They will not read it at all because they hate reading, at least as far as I'm concerned as an academic teacher. That is why I wanted you to reconsider this idea of providing a little bit more visualization of information. What would you expect from those who should apply? And that is it. Thanks.
I got a question. Can you explain, because we come a bit here to terminology challenge, because one of the big challenges in the style guide when we started on it is that we had to reconcile among us who were writing it what we meant with certain terms and expectations behind the terms. So we know that with the word ontology or with the word vocabulary or controlled vocabulary, there comes some associations with it. And that because of the history of this not something that we could find that everybody would agree upon. So now I come to, we use the word conceptual model here in a way that we thought this is neutral enough to capture that we want to have something, a language, a model that captures the core, the essence of the data specification. That is the interpretation that we have given to it. But maybe you have something more specific in mind with the word conceptual model, and that gives you something that we were not intending. So that's the first question on that.
Perhaps I will just come a little bit closer to the idea that I wanted to present. Some definitions are not reserved for one field of operating, and it may be misleading when you are expecting something from the conceptual model as defined within guidelines, which are pretty long, in fact, and hard to read. In fact, for the regular student, as far as I'm concerned. So I think that some kind of misleading the goal is present. I mean, we cannot reserve, or one cannot reserve something totally and straightly to the UML definition. Well, it is already used within the market, within a little bit different meaning. So
But
that
that's
is
all.
my main assumption, to say that people will not understand guidelines as you wish them to understand it, because they use the conceptual model in a totally different meaning in practice. The regular practice that is already present.
Well, we define a very fixed UML interpretation. We provide a fixed interpretation. So if those people are allergic as they may be to reading, still give it a try and read the UML interpretation. It's pretty fixed interpretation for how a class, an attribute should be interpreted in terms of owl or shackle shapes. So we do this in the rule number 2. But I think you're also referring to easing the digestion, to make this style guide more digestible, right? With some pictures or some diagrams to reflect the rules. So what comes to my mind, for example, when it comes to UML, perhaps, for example, this interpretation here, this table, I have an idea how it could be represented as a diagram, to say, this is how these are the boundaries of your expressivity within UML. Don't use anything else, and that's how you express each of these things. And we can make a visual diagram to say like good examples, or like what we mean here. So if that is what might help or might address your concern, then we could give it. We could consider it.
Could I make a comment here?
Yeah.
So a little bit my understanding is not necessarily the style guide per se that Agnieszka is addressing, but the whole idea that software developers doesn't necessarily read documentation. So whatever is produced in a type of application profile, there is not really that read. And I totally kind of agree with that perspective, and the way that developers are very much used to is to include libraries and expecting to get guidance and information in using that library as part of the library. And that's a little bit what we are trying to do by actually creating the SDK. So thereby you're just getting a toolkit for that vocabulary, for that domain, and then you include it in your project, and you can use, it will automatically gives you the names, and it will, on compile time, if the vocabulary has changed, you will see it. And that's really what I wanted to address on that idea of the RDFS, so we can actually generate those libraries. And that address got us issues about making sure that we are enabling developers in a better way. Well, I mean, I've got that wrong, but that was my understanding.
No, it makes total sense, but this is on the adoption, let's say, when this is on the technical layer already, and on the like adoption side, right? Like giving examples, creating SDKs. So that part we specifically we left it out, but I understand the concern for this aspect, and yeah, we should probably consider expanding the style guide to include it also with recommendations on how to support the adoption by the developers and the technical people. So building SDKs, for example, is a very good idea.
Adoption of the vocabulary that you want to exchange. So thereby, not necessarily saying the style guide, but so for instance, in our domain, when we generate the vocabulary, like the core vocabulary that you got here, organization, or, you actually have an SDK that goes with it, so that a developer that wants to develop something using that vocabulary can just add that SDK in.
Yeah.
I have to a bit of shorten the further the discussion because I think it's very worthwhile. We have, I see that Robert and Thomas raised their hands again, but I would give still shorter word to Vasilis and then to Rob to have a quick feedback that they can give. And so that we still can reach and then continue the discussion later on in the next step.
Okay, thank you, Bert. So I have one.
The word to Vasilis. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have one comment. I think the coming back to the discussion about the lightweight ontology, I think the term lightweight ontology is not very good because it implies that everything else is a heavyweight ontology. So I don't think that an ontology that has an inverse property or a disjoint is a heavyweight ontology. It's a matter of naming, actually. So I think it's been also this addressed in the chat that maybe the term core ontology, I don't know, but it's been used somewhere else. And then having other layers, as we discussed before, for adding more expressivity, because now, if you use, for example, an inverse property, you cannot follow this style guide. So you are out of this style guide. So I think you should...
You're partially aligned.
Yes, exactly. So I think that you should consider maybe changing this lightweight ontology because of this, the others are the heavyweight, and I don't think that they are. And then a way to add this other additional expressivity that you may, state may want to add, and how this can be exploited and translated to UML. Is this possible or not? That was my comment. Thank you.
So I can address that. I think it's a very good point here. We could have another rule, or we could have another guideline explaining this, because we just define here what the lightweight ontology is. But again, as you say, we left out, we didn't mention anything about the heavyweight part of it. So maybe we can have another recommendation on the heavyweight part, underlying the fact that they should be kind of separated, because when people reuse, they might reuse them differently, or they might reuse them. There might be implications for the reuse. And when we also have tools that implement, and we can do this automatic translation of XMIs into different artifacts. And there is somewhere else, there's a list of formal transformation rules, like this part of UML transforms into that part of OWL that way. So, but it's not, that is beyond the scope of the style guide, because it wants to provide like more loose or recommendations, and not like tooling implementation specifications, like how tools should be implemented specifically. So it's like next layer of being precise how things should be implemented.
So these rules leave things open to a certain extent, so that we try to allow multiple implementations possibilities, because if you can be very strict and say it has to be this like that, as you mentioned, Vasilis, in the sense of we have not included inverse of into it, into the lightweight. Well, you could argue, is this not or not needed? At which point it is? We tried not to do it, but there are probably arguments in some places that it should be useful to add it at a certain point in layer, and so on. And then at least there's a place where you can put it and discuss it. That's the goal of it. So it's fine. I still want to give the words to Rob shortly.
I just have a very quick comment on that. Do we want to have later on at one stage a specification that tools need to comply with?
You mean that that this style guide becomes a full reference that tools should fully comply with a strict conformance checking? Do you?
Yeah. Is that something we would like to in somewhere in the future?
Probably, ideally, everyone will try to drive towards this. In the practice, it will be very, very, very hard, we believe. There will be always slight variations and argumentations that can be done to it, but at least if we can identify and have a reference of discussion, why or not, because maybe you know in most of the W3C specification working groups, they work manually. They just type in everything. And then there's an argument sometimes what should be in the RDF representation or not. And so those guidelines should, at least we should be able to build or communicate with such a working group, and that does it manually, what should be in, what should be out, what is a good practice, and maybe something like that. So I don't know if it's fully aligned, but at least it will aid and to try to give us a communication basis.
I do understand, but bear in mind, these, if you have a requirement to a tool, there will be the minimum requirement. It's not saying, oh, you can't do more, but you know, you have to have a tool so that you have to comply with this. And that will be, if we're gonna have an emphasizing on the tooling, I mean, we can't do this manually. You know, we need to have somewhere, we need to have tools that can support us in this work, because it's not going to be just 3 or 4 vocabulary. So, and I think it's a long road, but I'm just asking, I think my answer to that is yes. One place down the line, we need to have a conformity to this type of, like the style guide, and tool vendors can come out and say, yeah, conform to all of these requirements, and yeah.
Yes, that's indeed, and for doing that, and this is actually the nice bridge to thing that we really want to share. So you, Rob and Thomas, if you still have raised your hands, we want to the assessment, self-assessment. We prepared a bit ourselves for the assessment of specifications. So in the beginning, we asked if you were assessing your specifications with these rules to see if they match and your current practices. To facilitate that, we collected and created a quick Excel sheet. Eugenio, are you presenting or?
Yes, I can show the Excel sheet.
Yeah.
So it's available as a template, but this is the one filled in for core location.
Yeah, so you have the category, the identifier of the rule, the title, and the statement. And then we have a categorization that you, for a specification, could say. And the categorization that we decided to use or to propose is, yes, we actually, the specification, this asset follows it fully. It's totally unaligned. It's a thing. It's partially aligned, so there are things to work on it. It might not be applicable. Some of the rules might not appear, or it's have nothing is in the specification that might be relevant. And according to maybe something is this, that the asset itself might have to be revised in total. And yeah, we did this for the core location vocabulary. And you see that we, in general, align to a large extent. But of course, the devil is in the details. There are a few elements into it, and that leads to us to 3 action points, main action points that came out of it. Is that although we do this lexicalization, how to represent things in RDF and in all light, that there's maybe still not clear what we use across all of them and have not expressed this. So this, if we want to share this to the community or core vocabularies, that we express what are the lexicalization rules to be used in the SEMIC context, and how we do that and how this is related. So this is, we do something, but it's more current practice, not shared. So we want to make it visible what is done over there. This comes towards the implementation. Can you go back, just Eugenio, to what we realized as well, and this is some attention point because of history, that we reused external vocabularies. And we have to be aware that some of these historic or reuses might be reassessed in the way how they have been expressed or in the intention that the reuse has happened. So that we fully or better align with the 3 layers of reuse and make that more clear and take action so that this reuse is trusted as is. And that's the reason, for instance, in the core vocabularies that we try to take up and collaborate with W3C on core person and core location and so on to get them in a quality full state and a collaborative effort. So this is to take this reuse in action. And last point, this is something obvious, and it has been identified in future work, is that although we do versioning and organization of the specifications, it is not clear to the audience, to the outside, if you look now to the core vocabularies and so on, what are the versioning rules, what is the follow-up, how we do it, so that you get this global governance picture as an outsider looking to the specification and how this is materialized into the metadata around the specification. And there are historically some variations, some URIs that have been stable, other were non-stable and so on. So there's a kind of variation into it. And so this is effort that is comes to SEMEC as, let's say, work that we have to add and to be more precise towards the community so that they can rely on even more quality data specifications. But of course, the high alignment is not to a certain surprise. Sense of this is to a certain extent the current practice formulated in a way which everybody to a large extent will. So I think most of the vocabularies or semantic data specifications will align to a large extent. But they might give some other challenges to it. Of course, as Eugenio already mentioned, we have the template and the example is on the GitHub.
So actually, we created in the landing page a self-assessment section where you can find the template and an example how we filled it in. So they can be found here, and it would be really, really nice if you would give it a try and see how your assets align with this style guide. And what's important to mention here, this is a self-assessment for alignment with of aligning the assets. Now, we probably need a similar self-assessment to check if there are implementations of tools that transform UML into OWL, Shackle, and other types of artifacts, then how they are aligned. So we don't have yet, we didn't create a similar template for the tooling, just to distinguish the two.
Okay. Yeah. So if we go short to the wrap up, plenary we had next. Okay, next slide. Yeah. So what we want to share is that this style guide, as we are discussing today, it is a living document. So it's something that is we feel that the community is likes to contribute to and likes to give, let's say, find consensus in a right way. So this is the goal that we want to have, that this is alive and it's not just produced now and then put in a corner and archived. We, although do not think that it will be updated on a very highly pace, but give us the time together to discuss with you some good comments so that we can improve on it and we see something like in the biannual big revision improvements on this. But anyhow, we welcome the comments as you already did on GitHub or via other channels. So that's the goal. What we think, okay, on the adoption. So we already got mentioning. I think we can thank Phil for it to have a discussion on this and a different audience say, okay, look at this style guide. What do you think of it? What do you align? What do you not? So this is just to mention that this is what we welcome. That this is people start discussing on it and use it as a reference in their discussion points. With regard to our adoption in CEMIC itself, of course, we will look to our own assets and try to apply to them. We want to mention that there are existing tools, Model to All or the Oslo toolchain, that to a large extent implement these things. So they follow the rules, but maybe have some outcomes that you would, as Vasilis mentioned, I want to have this inverse of property into it. They can be adapted to include that or not. And what we are, of course, welcoming, and this is the thing of reaching out as well again, in your assessment, if you think, if you have questions while doing an assessment, you can reach out to us. So that we can have a look to your assets or your tooling and say, okay, what is the challenge that you want to address, so that we can learn and improve and so on this. Okay, and so what we want to say is many thanks to everybody, not only the one around the table who were participating into it, but actually this is a result of a journey of the last 15 years. It's all our experience, lessons learned, feedback that we try to accumulate. Of course, there are some choices to be made into it to create here something, but I think we have created a document that addresses the need for coherency across the CEMIC assets and data specification, and that can be used as a discussion beyond on it. We originally planned to do the full release at the end of the month. Maybe because of the feedback and the GitHub issues, it might not be reached yet, but that's our aim at the end of the month to finalize and to give you a first version release so that we can build upon that for the next years. Okay, can we? Are we still doing the poll?
Yeah, I would still like to do the poll, because there we try to see what your interest is for the different topics, and we want to do a little prioritization exercise to see where we should focus our efforts on.
The slides a bit further. So we had planned a final poll, and this is to take you a little last time before lunch. So here it is. The first question that Jitse will activate now is, do you plan on revising your specifications based on the style guides? So how does this influence? So do you think you're going to improve or change or adapt certain elements on your data specifications? Can you keep on the slides, Junior? Thank you. I'll take your screen now. And what Jitse, you say when the next question comes up?
Yeah, I will. Let's give 10 more seconds and then we move to the second question.
Okay, and the second question that will come up is the following, namely, we know, and this was one of the requests and that we got in the bilaterals is that this need for a style guide and kind of rules in building data specifications was needed in your organization or national, regional governance to give a drive to it. And then you could link to some experience and some rules to it. So here's a question: do you want to adapt or plan to use it in your organization and to refer to it and use it as a basis for your semantic data specifications building process?
Yeah, the question is live, and we'll give another 10 seconds for that one. But I see most people have already voted.
And
yeah, moving on to the last question.
And the last question is, then we had some presented already, some topics of going and discussed some topics that were raised. Maybe they are not yet into the list, but the goal is this can help us to prioritize what are the topics that we should tackle first with you as community, and where we can write blog articles or extensions of the data specific of the style guide to, leaving this a bit open, but so that we have a feeling that we know where to prioritize the next activities upon.
Yeah, giving 30 more seconds for that one because it takes a bit longer to read through all of the topics.
And thank you, Lucia, for the feedback on tools and processes. I think indeed that was what I spotted this through the chat as well. Indeed, that connecting this with tools and with actual, let's say, implementation variations of different tools is probably a need that we need to address as a community, and to see what is kind of a collection of tools with the extensions that aid in building the data specifications that are coherent and can be used, because that's of course the goal, and that we can reuse data specifications produced by tool one in another context.
Okay, let's go to the results then, and then we can wrap up. I think, Eugenio, if you just continue, does it show or not? No, no need to refresh. 1 second. Yep. You still want to run through it, Bert?
If I see the results, then I can answer. Good. If you see that there's interest to actively work with the style guides on your specifications, so we hope to get a lot of feedback based on that experience. Okay, next slide. Okay, so there's a lot of interest to adopt and to translate it into the local context. So probably have to facilitate as well that we can have this kind of a cross linking and have an idea of how they are different. So as a suggestion, when it's possible, to publish them as well online or publicly available, so that we even in your own in your national language, that we can reference to it and that we can have some idea on it, as a suggestion. And then we see governance. Okay, that's the same thing as we have identified on our own site. And then a special one on controlled vocabularies management and expression. Okay, good. Then this is a separate topic to improve on that and to do something on that. And then, of course, we go to mapping alignments, authoritative standards, do's and don'ts. Okay. Thank you. Okay, and this is just to say thanks for everyone. So wrap up. Yeah, okay, good. So we have just a reminder of the planning. So we had 2 webinars, and we try to release at the end of the month the first version of this. And then I think I've saying this. Thank you. Yes, indeed, that was the warm welcome, and I think this was a live discussion. So with a plenary, it's always difficult if we have a lot of questions, but this was very well, and thank you. I hope that this kind of sessions we can have them in the future, and maybe organize more something like a workshop style where we can discuss in individual topics with your expertise and share your expertise more in depth. Thank you very much.
Have a nice afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All the best. Bye.
Thank you.